So again, welcome everyone to today's Midnight Training Series. In this 6.3 training video, we'll be going over the basics of our print estimation system. We'll be taking a look at the global settings and going over some of the core setup requirements to make sure the calculator is available and does what we need it to do. We'll prepare to launch it and also utilize it with a live scenario. To begin, we'll take a look at our global settings within our admin menu. In here, if we take a look at our estimates and orders, we have a few default options in which we can place for our calculator. Some of these we don't need to worry about as they pertain to either a more complex system of calculator scenarios such as our wide format calculator, which we'll be ignoring for this session. Other options like our print estimate markup will pertain to what we're doing today. The print estimate markup here refers to the global markup, which is built into the calculator. That is because in all cases, this is assumed to be a cost-plus system. As you enter all of your information, your inventory, your press operations, and your inks at the cost level, the print estimate markup here allows you to generate profit from your calculator. And this print estimate markup of 20% provides you with the ability to not enter a job quickly without having any markup or theoretically pricing your job at cost inadvertently. The other useful fields in here are the print calculator price matching button. When this is enabled, you have the ability to override the calculated price out of the calculator by plugging in a new value for yourself to use for invoicing purposes. All of the original values will be retained for job costing and profitability calculation, but the customer will be able to be invoiced an amount that is different from its original calculated price. Allowing users to edit calculated fields when turned on provides users with the ability to do things such as change plate counts, change the number up on a print job, and also make a few other subtle changes. Long story short, if your team is more or less proficient at handling print estimation entry, then it is worth leaving this field open to allow for scenarios such as Dutch cutting, etc. And if your sales team is largely not proficient or familiar with print estimating, it's safe to build templates and have this field turned off, so that way data can't be updated in the field that could cause more problems down the road. The other choices here include a print calculator's bleed, which is a default bleed added to all jobs and can be manually overwritten on the job-by-job scenario as needed. The allow SIG edit or parent sheet edit, which is an override within the calculated fields option, meaning that when this is turned off, you can still open up these two fields. And the minimum markup is a percentage value, which allows you to prevent your team from being able to enter a cost plus job at too low of a markup. Now, in order to get our calculator up and running, we do need to have a service designated in order to launch the calculator. Those controls are listed within the standard services menu here. While you're within the standard services menu list, you'll see that there's a column for action. The action here lists what will happen when you select your service. In many cases, you will have a no action or possibly a wizard selected, but the ones that we're looking for in this case refer to having a service with the print calc option selected. If I take a look at one of my print calculator services, such as postcard printing, we'll see that our service action here is defined as launch print calculator. This will bring up the calc when we select it on the order or the estimate form, and will thus allow us to ignore all the pricing information listed within these scenario cells, as we'll be utilizing the calculator's method of price generation in lieu of the built-in pricing you can accommodate here. The same goes for unit cost and also for run rate, as the run rate is calculated out for the operation as you fill out your press details, paper info, etc. And the cost is generated from it all as well. The other useful information here is the machine department. If you wish to accommodate scheduling for your print calculator services, either through the dynamic job board or through our shop floor television view, you'll need to have the appropriate checkbox here checked to allow it to appear where you'd like it to appear. Having a machine department generated within the machines and machine departments lists allows you to pick a group of available machinery for scheduling. And if you have a department selected, subsequently you can pick a specific machine to operate your job on. Typically, our users tend to leave the machine department selected as print to include their options for their presses only, and they'll leave the machine option blank, allowing them to pick and choose what machine they'll be doing their work on at the appropriate time. Now, from here on, the other choices that we'll be able to modify and micromanage include the press itself, the ink, our templates, and also a couple of other choices such as the available options for finish and grade on our stock, and to build in a cutter if we need. The presses themselves are controlled within the print menu's press standard list. In here, you'll see all of your different presses, and if you enter one of them, you can see the details for offset, digital, impressions per hour, etc. As we take a look at our presses themselves, we can determine whether or not they are a press type by picking what they operate through. Either offset being an ink priced machine, or digital being a click price machine. Additionally, we can use this add press standard to modify and create new instances of a press. From here, the requirements to generate a new instance involve selecting the press type first, digital or offset, and then secondly, the material type of sheet or roll to determine what type of stock is compatible with your machine. The majority of our users tend to run sheet-fed machinery, so you may find yourself more successfully selecting sheet to make sure it's compatible with your sheet type inventory. But if you run a variety, then be sure to pick either or. For our digital sheet-fed and roll-fed operations, you'll see there are two slightly different methods of data entry. For digital sheet-fed operations, you have a default run type, which you can define, meaning that when you pick your press, this is what will load in, along with a default hourly rate, assumed to be at cost, including your general expenses, assumed labor costs, overhead, insurance rates, etc. And impressions per hour, which is an assumed average run speed based on the operation type, in this case, one-sided. Additionally, a run sheet length and width, which determine the maximum size of stock that can fit through your machine. A setup for sheet margin and registration marks, which allows the operation to determine how much printable space exists on the page. A spoilage percentage, which calculates out a little additional inventory consumed on the off chance that you need to do something regarding counting inventory as well as counting the waste or spoilage associated with it for deduction purposes. And finally, handling the setup for consumables, time, and sheets, which also calculates into the amount of time spent for an operation, increasing the hourly rate, the amount of expenses calculated out for a additional cost analysis, and the setup sheets for more material tracking. Down below, you can define whether your clicks exist, and if so, what they are. Typically, this is expected to be maybe black and or color clicks, in which you define your size and also your rate. This size implies that if you're running smaller click operations, that you may want to be able to charge double or triple for larger sized operations, etc. And when you plug your rate in here, then this will be your cost per click. Additionally, if you're running a digital inkjet machine, such as a Canon i300, you may have cases in which you can run both ink and clicks. In this case here, you can determine what your method of pricing is, whether it be by per piece, by area, or by ink volume consumption. And after you select this, you can fill out details according to your press's core information to let you know exactly what your cost is going to be. Roll information is pretty much the same. The differences here exist in primarily the available info for what you can fit through your press. The max roll width accommodates for how much space or how wide your roll can be. The max image area assumes the amount of printable space, and the margin cuts into that. Everything else here is pretty much the standard setup. And for offset jobs, you see a much more simple menu. In this case, we have pretty much the same information that we saw before, only with roll-fed or sheet-fed offset operations. The run types vary from one-sided to 4 different types of two-sided operations. It also allows you to pick make-ready info, such as how many hours are associated with make-ready, repeat make-ready, and also wash-up and repeat wash-up, and determine a flat count of how many make-ready sheets you'll be using. Additionally, the make-ready can be adjusted in such a way so that your color counts, or how many colors you're using on your job, can accommodate for how many counts of the make-ready instances you have. For instance, being if you have a color unit make-ready set up on a 4-color postcard, you'll be running one set of, in this case, 10 make-ready sheets through per color, or 40 in total. Run sheet length and width, registration marks and color bars, gripper, all of those make sense to calculate out of the printable space that we saw a few minutes ago. And also plate costs are included, as well as a maximum amount of plate impressions. Max plate impressions here means that if you were to set up a count of plates and you're running a high volume or very high volume job, if you were to have your plate usage exceed what your max plate impressions is, a new plate will be generated, and they'll all be set to operate at a per plate cost of whatever variable you type in here. The next step after getting your presses ready is if you are utilizing ink, to go into your print menu's ink management screen. From here, you can set up 2 layers of pricing. Either your inks with just the core pricing as the cost per pound, in which you take advantage of the bottom row, fill out your details, and plug in a cost per pound here before clicking save. Or secondary information pertaining to the ink group. The ink groups here, after they're created, can be set up upon entry with an amount of colors in which the cost per pound is derived from what you had set up in your ink setup screen. The average cost per pound is thus calculated as the sum of all of the inks that you have listed here divided by the count to help determine exactly, or at least a rough estimate of what exactly it is your cost will be for your ink. Finally, within the warehouse module, we have the core settings to allow you to select and fill out for your stock. While you may already have stock in the system, there are a few things to make sure that you have set up before you can properly use them. Above all, you do need to make sure that your item type is compatible with the print calculator. And this is controlled by a checkbox within the warehouse item types list of your admin menu. If the print type box is checked, then any item with the category within that print type can be selected. Additionally, you'll also need to make sure that your paper types and paper details within the information of the paper details tab are correctly set up. Notably in here, you'll need to make sure that your material type is set to sheet or roll so that it's compatible with the press that you're trying to run it through. You also need to make sure that your parent sheet length and width are populated so that way you have a default size for your stock to be trimmed down and estimated from. The caliper will contribute towards how the cutter calculates if you decide that you'd like to use the cutter. And all of your pricing in the case of sheets will be derived from the cost per M sheets, in which you list your cost at a per thousand level, with a markup built in here as you feel necessary. Or if you're running a roll, then you can determine one of 3 different ways to price your roll, either based on weight, length consumed, or just a flat cost per roll, period. In this case, the length and width of your roll would need to be listed so that way your press can calculate how much can be used per roll. And both the length and width are assumed to be listed in inches. Finally, for ink calculation, the cover and text box here contribute towards whether or not more ink would need to be consumed in order to completely cover or meet the requirements to cover a particular area of your stock as it's being printed. A few other tips in here. While this is for general inventory usage, you do need to make sure that your active box is turned on for your item. And if you have inventory set up for a specific customer, then it will only be available for that customer unless you have the global box checked. Having this box checked would be all but required for anything that you consider to be in-house stock. So if you have something in-house like your generic 8.5 by 11, you may want to make sure that you have this box checked so that way it's available for any job regardless of the customer. Alternatively, you may want to make sure to have it unchecked if you're working with customer-provided stock and materials to make sure you don't accidentally have your team select the stock for somebody else on a job for a customer that is not matched for. Additionally, if you want to be able to purchase your stock from vendors, you do need to make sure that under your Details tab, the PO item box is checked. This allows you to sync your item with the vendors that you purchase them from, and thus be able to make purchase orders marked against the item for easier method of acquisition and convenience of association with our inventory's receiving system. Now we've got those out of the way, there are a few other things we can handle, but we'll be taking a look at those later on. Right now, we'll be looking at a case of an estimate in which we actually build to see exactly how this would need to look when it's being entered into the system. In this case, in order to get something on the board, it'd be simple to just fill out your general information such as what the job is, the customer in which it's for, an expected count, and maybe a little other information such as a due date to get it on the job board and production reports when it's converted from an estimate to an order, and any other information you feel necessary. From here, I'll need to go into our service type that we have services for the launch print calculator often set up for. In this case, I'll pick my print product service as it's designated to launch the calculator. And in here, we have tabs corresponding to the majority of the information we just got finished setting up, such as our press, color, paper, etc. I'll start by filling in the description. Postcards, 404, gloss. From here, we can fill out info such as the size of the finished product, the press that we'll be running it on, taking note that if you select a press marked as offset, there'll be make ready choices here, and in the color details tab, a color selector. And if you are to select a machine that's marked as digital, instead of the make ready, you'll have a much more simple looking press details window, and also click availability for your color comps, either black, color, whatever it is that you set. From here, I can pick details on my side, noting that my impressions per hour, sheet margin, hourly rate, everything all loaded in just fine. Pick my color counts, in this case my 4/4 or color over color. Means that when I select my color clicks, my price carries in. And when I'm prepared, I can pick my stock that I'll be using in one of two ways. I can either use the filter here to type in information, see what comes up, and select as needed. Alternatively, I can click the blue paper button, and this generates a pop-out in which we can use to search for paper in different ways, such as by doing a search for colors of the stock itself, looking for size counts, searching based on weight, by finish type, or by grade, and picking it from here to populate our list as needed. At this point, you'll notice that there's a parent sheet and run sheet listed. The parent sheet will be the actual dimensions of the stock itself. The run sheet will be the size that will actually be run through the press, meaning that if you have a larger size stock, you can trim it down and list the size of the materials which will be run through. This will help generate how much material is actually being consumed when running a job. For instance, it's important to remember that if you're running a 22x17 stock through a 12x18 machine, you'll have to trim it in half to make everything fit. In this case, I'll pick an 11x17, which gives us a few to trim down through. I'll run it through 8.5x11. And from here, we've got pretty much everything we need to make the calculator do what we need it to do. You'll see that there's a lot of zeros, and the run results area is empty. When I click the calculate button, our tabs will update with a green icon to indicate whether or not they're being used. And then our run results list will update, showing us info such as our pricing, the amount of time spent for the job, ink consumed if ink is involved, the amount of material used, parent sheets being the actual stock consumed, and run sheets being the amount of material run through your machine, and the total cost. This total cost is made up of run details type calculation, which includes the press, ink, clicks, paper cost, additional services, which I'll be going over later on, everything of which sums up to a total, which would then have a markup applied for a print total, and then any flat fee additions, such as a raw setup fee, would be added into the calculated print total, or a grand total, which will be divided by the count to give us a per piece cost, and is effectively what we'll be invoicing to the client. Now, if you remember, I mentioned earlier that there is a price matching method. Price matching allows you to override the calculated total cost with a new price, meaning that if you need to quote your customer a different number to meet a certain need, you can take advantage of that instead. In this case, if I simply hit submit, my $3,209.90 worth of printing will load down into the line item section of our estimate form. If I use price matching, then this will update to a new value, but within the calculator, all the original values will be retained for job costing, accuracy, and profitability measuring. To go back into a calculator, assuming you've made a mistake or need to make a change, you can click the Launch button to reopen the calculator. Once the calculator reopens, you can fill out and make any other changes that you need to, such as picking a different press, different stock, etc. And as you fill out your changes, simply hit the Calculate button again, and it will recalculate your info most accordingly to give you the correct info that you need and a new recalculated price. Once you're satisfied, click the Submit button and you'll commit that record. If you intend to use the calculator with multi-quantity estimating, for instance, providing multiple different counts and costs per count to your customer, you can utilize the Multiple Quantities tab. In here, as you plug in new counts and click the Update Pricing button, we'll have a calculation set so that way whatever it is you're running your price with will be updated accordingly. If you need to make changes to the multi-quantity instance, such as modifying the services included, you'll not be able to utilize this element of the software quite yet. We are updating it to allow you to. You can see the price of each component listed in here on the case that you have multiple components listed: printing, mailing, folding, cutting, embossing, etc. But for the print calculator associated services, we do not allow you to edit them within this area, mostly because areas of a print calculator are tied together in such a close way that modifying one value may cause issues down the road for others. That said, if you wish to delete anything as far as your calculator goes, you'll need to re-enter it and then click the Delete button here to actually get rid of it. Finally, while we're within here, we can have services available to pick within the calculator, such as cutting, folding, binding, stitching, embossing, whatever the case may be. The services in this list are populated as generalized services from your standard service menu. In here, as you pick them, clicking the Save button commits that record and generates what could or could not be a calculated price to be included with either the total cost or the print total, difference being whether or not markup is applied. You can determine this As you fill these out by making sure the markup box is checked or unchecked accordingly. In this case now, if I run my calculations a second time, I'll see my price for my total cost shoot up, and I'll also see a service price total. This service price, in this case, is $500 for my non-marked up service, and is $300 for my marked up service added into the total cost here. Lastly, within here, we have the volume pricing method. In here, you can build in different counts and costs based on your different printed amounts. You can either list a flat rate, for instance, to meet with a catalog feature or quoted list, or you can fill in a discount, implying that if you order more, you'll have a better deal. This information carries forward into the into the multi-quantity estimation calculator. So if we were to fill out different counts in here for 5, 10, 15, 20, etc., 1,000, then as you fill out those numbers and then go into the multi-quantity tab, the numbers, either discounted or rate-based, will pull themselves into these numbers and more accurately reflect the numbers that you need to utilize. In order to make a service appear within the calculator's additional services tab, not much needs to be done, but there are a few pricing differences which you need to be aware of. In the case of my previously selected service of drilling, you'll need to make sure that you have the print additional service box checked. Additionally, the cost per unit here can be different from the cost or the base price of the unit listed here. The main thing to consider in this case is that you may have a price be slightly different for inclusive operations, such as being able to drill while you're considering this to be a press job. In these cases, you may consider altering the price slightly versus doing it as a standalone operation. Additionally, the volume pricing listed in here contributes towards the altering of the price that loads itself onto the additional services menu within the calculator's form. This does mean that you can theoretically have 2 layers of volume discounting set up, so you do be careful when setting up your prices. The last thing I'd like to take a look at is within the estimate form, converting this to an order and seeing what happens. So within our estimate here, if we convert this to a job, or if we take advantage of the multi-quantity tab and convert one of our quantities to a job, we can either click the export button down here or up here to push the count to a new order. The order will be generated and will be brought straight into it. From here, we'll see a few differences, one of which being that the inventory tab, which didn't exist within the estimate screen, now exists and displays the amount of inventory required to complete our job. Additionally, we'll have access to reports that we didn't have within the estimator. For instance, we have our work order reports, which load and display all of our different pricing information. All of our different production information. We'll see full details on our press, materials, additional associated services, and if an item is marked in our system, not only where it is, but how much of it we have available for the job. Alternatively, we have a variety of invoices that will display our information in a handful of ways, either consolidating print services and their associated services together, like in our invoice print, That one's broken, sorry. Or by listing everything out via customized pricing method using our group billing invoice, which allows us to pick and choose and group how we need. Or finally, within our invoice price, I just list everything at nickel and dime. And finally, our invoice, which lists all of the components of a job without the individual pricing elements for each piece. The other area that is updated when you convert an estimate to an order, or at least use an order with a print item and have a due date plugged in, is the dynamic job board. The job board will be updated to show the services that are listed both within the calculator itself and within the additional services area of the calculator. We'll find them in their respective departments, with details matching what it is that we saw. And from here, we can mark the services as being worked on, schedule them to appear on our calendar, actually log time against them, or simply prepare an employee to work on them with a machine as we find fit. You'll see that in here, under the print tab, I have only my printer, or I'm sorry, my postcard service. Under the finishing tab, we'll see all of the other services, such as the drilling that I had selected earlier. With all that said, I'll be concluding today's training session, turning off my recording, and opening everything up for Q&A.